The principal problem that I talk about is the notion that the protectionistic pressures that we're seeing may be the worst cure for the disease that currently affects us in the following sense. The big opportunity for growth, the biggest single lever that we can think of right now is additional integration, because current levels of integration of the world economy are still very low. And if we turn towards protectionism, we're going to be turning our backs on the single most important source of growth available to us. Well, I think there's a lot of discussion of how emerging markets can take advantage of the West's weaknesses. I prefer not to frame it in those terms because, unfortunately to me, that has a little bit of a flavor of making international exchange seem like a zero-sum game, where one country's gains are inevitably another country's losses. The point that I'd like to make is that it's a positive-sum game rather than a zero-sum game. There are some huge complementarities between what emerging markets have to offer and what developed economies need, as well as the other way around. And so what we may see in the future for the first time in recent history is a pattern of balanced exchange where both parties are contributing something essential to the other's welfare. I certainly don't believe that globalization in the sense of international interactions is a myth, and I would probably be a fairly ineffective professor of global strategy if I believed that. There is significant overstatement about how internationally integrated we are, and that much of the potential for countries and for companies to increase their level of integration with overseas stems from the fact that current levels of integration are very low. Africa is certainly seeing an resurgence of interest in recent years and some better press than it has had in the past. I think that when one looks at the challenges of African development, however, one of the most striking things to me is the extent to which the continent is going to have to depend, to a greater extent than it has to this point, on increased integration within Africa. There's a misconception that regional integration is a second best to global integration. What we need to remember is that the richest regions of the world are the ones that have the highest level of within-continent integration. That's a measure on which Africa falls very far short still. Well, I think that for Portuguese companies, I was looking around before the seminar for examples of Portuguese companies operating overseas. And I think generally speaking, there has been an excessive focus on markets that are very similar to Portugal. A critical piece of advice I give to Portuguese companies is that they need to do a better job of addressing differences that arise across national borders than they currently do if they're going to be successful anywhere outside their traditional markets, which are mostly in Europe.